How Gen Z became the poorest generation. Here we go. This is what I was talking about earlier. Okay, let's do it. I'm excited.
Almost everywhere online, you'll notice videos, articles, and news clips talking about Gen Z becoming poorer. And we've even done so on this channel before too. But oftentimes, you'll see people say it's because
Yeah, here we go. Gen Z is the laziest generation. I remember when my brother got called lazy, and he's a millennial.
Gen Z are lazy, entitled, and not having enough children or families. We see population collapse looming over the horizon as many warn about what's to come when there just aren't enough children to sustain the coming future. Is this
Japan's going through that, and they're having problems too, by the way.
All just because
Quite
Generation
awful.
Z supposedly wastes all their money on morning Starbucks and owning an iPhone? Well, it doesn't take...
That's a good one! That is a good one! That's funny. Yeah, Starbucks, I go every day. Starbucks in my ass. iPhone
long to
users.
realize this is far from the truth, and is merely a band-aid type
avocado
reasoning
toast.
over the massive gaping wound causing Generation Z to become so much poorer than other generations. So are Generation Z, an entire generation of people around the West, just really that lazy if they physically can't work more than 12 hours a day to sustain a life? How is it that in the past,
The difference is that 12 hours a day actually sustained you. Now you're just hemorrhaging money as you're working 12 hours a day or more.
you could really just get a job through an ad in the local paper on only a high school diploma and by living off a regular normal salary?
Oh, not even a high school diploma. I've heard of stories of boomers that didn't even finish high school that have decent jobs. Yeah, I actually have firsthand.
You could have a big house, a stay-at-home wife, with 3 children, all sustained by just one salary at your normal job. What has led to this giant disparity in such a short time span where people can barely survive today, where the living conditions have become so much worse? Why does it appear that to live a normal life now is just so out of reach for most in Generation Z? And what effect will this have on the future? Well,
It's clearly the video games, chat. Very clearly.
To understand this whole situation, we need to go back in time to compare the life of a regular person to someone today. In the past, for other generations, higher education was a sure way of moving upwards in the social structure. However, today, this is just becoming more and more of a financial black hole.
It's not even that, it's the fact that people try to sell you on this, and then you have to give away your entire life to pay back something that isn't even a guarantee. You didn't have to go to college back in the day. You could move up from being a paper boy to becoming a regional manager if you stayed at a company long enough. Now you can go fuck yourself if you work for 5 years at the same company. They won't give you a raise.
Tuition, which has doubled the amount that students will have to pay in the last 20 years, has completely exploded. If we count that with inflation, the tuition for public colleges in the US has jumped by more than 213% compared to the 1980s. Baby boomers would pay about $10,000 converted with inflation to 2018, but Generation Z now at the very minimum is paying $25,910. And more often than not, it's often well into the 6-figure range, as this number also excludes rentals, administration fees, stationery and food, which is why there's such crippling debt all over America for students right now. And even if you do get the best grades and scholarships possible, many Generation Z students are still required to take on these huge predatory loans that stay with you even if you go bankrupt. And so
it's because all these colleges are a fucking racket, and they realize that they started brainwashing them back in like the 70s and 80s. I've talked to Gen Xers, and they said that kind of mentality for the loans started around about in the late 70s to the early 80s, where tuition started increasing slowly. We're just paying for it now. And this not only happens in America, but in other places. I know in Europe there are places where you don't have to pay for school, but a lot of them do, unfortunately.
even when they make it outside of university, they now have a huge burden of loans hanging over them, restricting all of their financial decisions. And all of this for really what? Unless your degree is specifically needed for your line of work, getting a degree doesn't seem like a direct pathway to a good job anymore. It doesn't even guarantee entry-level jobs that can barely cover.
My parents, when I went to college, thought if I finished college, I would be guaranteed to have a job. And then when my brother, who's older than me, finished college and he spent 3 years looking for a job that was related to what he was studying, they realized that they fucked up, but they still tried to push me to go to college personally. I dropped out myself, and then my brother got a trade job, and he became an electrician's apprentice, and now he's like a full-blown one. But I think that like trade schools are way better because they actually don't scam you for a bunch of money. It's still quite expensive, don't get me wrong. However, it's worth it because you actually get a job. You actually get a career out of it.
Daily expenses, and universities are just becoming less and less of an option without enrolling in highly competitive career-focused courses. As Gen Z entered the workplace, it was a culture shock to be expected to do jobs that didn't suit their idea of what working would be, as now most companies need work experience, and if you're fresh out of college, this is almost impossible. I mean, despite abundant claims of job openings, finding work has become harder than ever. The news will always tell you that companies today are struggling to fill positions, and yet
one of my first ever jobs was a part-time like fill-in receptionist for a company, and the only reason I got the job is because my mom knew the upper management dude who like knows the boss of the company. And I spent 3 weeks looking for a job, and my mom finally gave up and said, I'm gonna ask around and see what I can do. And I finally got a job, and it felt so slimy because it's like I put in effort into looking for a job, and the only reason I got this job is because my mom knew someone. Yes, I know nepotism, like I know it's bad. I'm just saying that's my first-hand experience of being of realizing what was happening. And this was years ago too.
Countless people in Generation Z specifically can never seem to find a job, even if they send out dozens or even hundreds of applications without a single interview. Decades ago, this was never the case. Even during job shortages, getting hired was much simpler. Advice like dressing well and filling out your CV was often just enough. Even just asking for a manager's time often worked. Persistence led to success. But today,
my friend who worked at a hospital, she said that she asked for a raise that was above 30 cents and they told her to go fuck herself. She then had another meeting where she was extremely pissed off at her supervisor, and she said that the only reason they don't give her more than 30 cents per hour increase on her raise is because management, like the corpos that own the hospital, said that she's not allowed to, even though she's a stellar fucking worker. Isn't that fucked? 30 cents an hour is the maximum you can get. It's pathetic.
this approach is much harder.
And she's a good worker. It's not like she's, some fucking dum-dum who just clocks in and doesn't do anything. She was a good worker. Just leave the job. I told her that and she tried. She was looking for other jobs and there was nothing better. It sucks. That's the worst part.
One major shift is the rising bar for entry. Before 2000, a college degree almost guaranteed you a good job. For other generations in the past, this was just a given. It was why you went to university. But for the first time ever, this isn't the case for Generation Z. Instead of companies competing for graduates, now a degree is the bare minimum for them. Employers now focus on the top few percent of candidates, while most roles require years of experience even for entry-level jobs. The internet has also transformed hiring. In the past, companies recruited through local events, word of mouth, or physical job postings, limiting competition and making hiring even more.
Oh, even better. They use AI to filter out who isn't even an option. If you have certain words in your CV or your whatever, your curriculum, your fucking listing, you get filtered out. Yep.
Personal. Today, a single online job listing can attract thousands of applicants
instantly.
Shit. With no need to apply in person, people send out applications en masse, creating a numbers-driven process that favors quantity over quality. This also mirrors trends in modern dating too for Generation Z, where technology has expanded competition, turning personal connections into data-driven interactions. Both industries now set higher standards due to the illusion of endless options, leading to dehumanizing experiences for individuals, and making it that much harder for Generation Z not only to create a family, employee, but even have the money to support one. And then in recent years, automation only made it that much harder. Application tracking systems, otherwise known as ATS, is used by nearly all major companies to filter candidates based on criteria.
This is what I was talking about. This exact thing.
Like keywords, experience, or location. Originally designed for simpler tasks, these systems now reject applicants automatically for failing to match specific parameters.
Referred, source, applied, internal, agency. It's actually insane.
Many CVs are just discarded without ever being reviewed by a human. To stand out, applicants must tailor their CVs to each job posting, mimicking keywords and avoiding formatting issues that could confuse ATS software.
They're min-maxing job applications. Oh my god, I'm so glad I got out when I did. I think I probably would have blown my brains out if I had to deal with this. I'm putting my hands into my face and my face into my hands, but this is actually sad. It's depressing.
Tedious process leaves many feeling demoralized, especially when rejection emails just become normal, and yet at the same time you see on social media all of these rich millionaires living it up in places like Dubai. Even with the widespread use of ATS, the hiring process
Dubai, where you shit on glass tables and talk to Saudi princes,
remains overwhelmed. AI is making these systems that much more sophisticated, allowing companies to further automate hiring while removing human judgment. This efficiency-driven approach reduces applicants to mere data points.
Where have I heard also AI being used for rejecting or accepting stuff? Insurance companies do this as well. And one of them, United Healthcare, apparently they had a 60% error rate and they didn't fix it. I wonder if this applies to jobs too, like job applications. Yeah, because like AI isn't perfect. It was 90%, well, even better. That proves my point. They fuck you,
stripping
man.
away opportunities for personal connections. The result is a hiring landscape that feels impersonal and unfair. While job hunting has always been challenging, the rise of automation heightened competition, and unrealistic standards have made it far more dehumanizing. Before, you were given an opportunity to have an interview face-to-face to at least give the employer a good impression. This is now only merited if you're selected for an interview at all. Data is the deciding factor amongst all, and any good explanations for any shortfalls in your CV fall through the cracks and are shifted to the rejected pile. There's even systems now that only pick up on certain words which might keep your application in the run. But again, the competition is fierce. Even the format of your CV can count against you if their automated system is unable to read it. Then there's the problem with advertising jobs.
And what if they make a mistake? Then you just get fucked even though you're the best person for the job? This is fucking sad.
That are just no longer active. As per company policy, while they already have an applicant in mind, they still have to advertise. Or perhaps they filled the position but don't take the advert down. And if by chance you do get selected, you'll then be subjected to a questionnaire designed to gauge your submission to authority, as companies now want to hire people who will not challenge their expectations and restrictions.
Or ask for raises when they do well. That's another really good one. Yeah. When I was applying for a retail job, my parents thought I was lying. I applied for a retail job at like some local retail store that's like oriented towards women. I went to 3 interviews and it was just a bunch of girls that never had like jobs before, and they ended up picking the girls that had jobs before at retail, and they told everyone else to go kick rocks. I went through the 3 rounds and they kicked me out in the 3rd round. I was like, what the fuck? You just wasted my fucking time. It was an in-person interview too, by the way. Yeah. 3 interviews for a retail position. Chat, I am not even joking. I wish I could like teleport my memory and like put it on the screen. It was some fucking closeted ass fucking interview room with a bunch of shit on the shelves, and it was like 5 of us, and there was another 10 girls behind us that were trying to apply for that position. It was a fucking retail job for stocking shelves. It's so pathetic. And this was years ago, not even like fucking 5 years ago.
And if this couldn't get any worse for Generation Z, it seems like AI is looming in the distance to replace many jobs. And if it couldn't get any worse, Generation Z is one of the first generations to have been weakened on all fronts, bombarded with estrogenic chemicals from plastics, junk food, and sedentary lifestyles, making Generation Z one of the weakest, less energetic, and more easily controlled generations in history. But luckily, there is some hope, and that would be NMN. That's nicotinamide monocleotide. a derivative of the B vitamin niacin, which is known to dramatically improve health and longevity by serving as a precursor to NAD+, a compound that plays a crucial role in energy production, muscle regeneration, metabolism, and gene expression in the body. NMN works by replenishing diminished NAD+ levels, which naturally fall at a rate of about 1% per year. A 50-year-old person, for example, has about half of the NAD+ they had in their youth. Now, rather than me try to explain it, I'm going to let the doctor that discovered it explain it, with a clip from the Joe Rogan Experience.
What is NMN? Good question. So, from deterioration and disease, they're like the Pentagon. They sense when we're hungry.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it. This is going to cure me of my microplastics.
It's when we're exercising, and they send out the troops to defend us. And so we think that these genes are responsible for the effects of dieting and exercise, which is great. What that means is we can now mimic that with molecules.
This thing has been dubbed the limitless pill and can take 10 to 20 years off you. It's like the fountain of youth in a bottle. But the FDA, they're trying to keep it away from us. Why? Because a healthy, strong population is harder to control. The FDA is attempting to change the status of NMN supplements to be classified as a drug, which would allow pharmaceutical companies to control it. This move is not based on the efficacy or safety of M&M, but is aimed at cornering the market and taking the supplement away from you. A weaker population is, after all, easy to control, meaning that you should get it now while you still can. Black Forest supplements can help you out with that. And since they're the sponsor of this video, we have an exclusive offer for you. If you go to our link in the description or pinned comment, then for the next 48 hours, you can buy 2 and get 1 for free. So stock up now while you can. Wages have flatlined for the past 20 years. Of late, the average hourly earnings of employees in 2024 is the same as that of 1978, and that was during a bad economic down period. And so while living prices, real estate, just your normal expenses have shot through the roof, the income you receive really hasn't changed at all. This means there's far more restrictions in place that make it that much harder to live independently. And that's why today we're seeing more and more people in Generation Z living with their parents for as long as they can, not
my parents were actually so upset when my brother had to move back into the, onto the family house because they thought that he was doing something wrong. At least initially, they were like, why the fuck are you having such a struggle, like, finding a house or, like, renting and living next to your work? Because they didn't understand what was going on. They do now? But it's a little bit too late.
Because they want to. In the year 2023, nearly 45% of American adults who are 18 to 29 years old are living with their parents, which is the highest rate ever since the 1940s. This used to be something that was completely foreign for people living in America, and now it's just becoming normal. In fact, in the UK, 1 in 3 males and 1 in 4 females in the 20 to 34 age group still live in their parental homes.
It's funny because my parents, in Soviet Russia, they moved out of their parents' house, like, literally at 18 to go to college. They never lived with them again. Like, yeah, sure, they visited. That doesn't count. But, like, living? Yeah, they lived, like, in the city. They lived in the city, in college. Sure, it was, like, I don't know, like, an hour-long bus ride to college. But still, it's sad. Like, what the frig? And then people are gonna say, oh, well, it's Soviet Russia. It doesn't matter. If you go back in time and go to America at that time period, I'm sure it's the exact same thing. There's people that I've talked to that used to live in Texas in the 1970s and 80s. And yeah, sure, it's a massive city and you're living with all these people with the white picket fences, but shit. In Soviet Russia, did they pay rent? Yes, no shit. Yes, you pay rent.
The cost of food on average was about $4,500 per year per person between the years 2000 and 2010 for millennials. But Gen Z is now looking at 22% more at about $5,500 per year per person. So with all these financial problems set in place, with debt crippling Generation Z, it completely limits them in starting a life for themselves, pushing back the time that you get married and start a family of your own just because you're still not even able to live.
Women are having their first child at 32 and 33. It used to be 25, the average.
Live independently at this point, as it's simply not affordable. And while 2 salaries in one household should at least sustain a couple just starting, it often doesn't because both incomes are so low and the options are so limited. Added onto this, rising rental costs that we've all seen. It's clear to almost everyone now that housing affordability has dramatically changed over the years. In the 1970s, the average cost was about $23,000 for a home, which today, taking into account inflation, would
My parents immigrated and they bought a house with a pretty high mortgage in 1999. Are you shitting me? As immigrants, the bank gave them a loan and they were both working at the time. Then my mom had my brother and me. And she obviously didn't have a job, but they still could afford a mortgage. Oh my god, $23,000 for a fucking house. Are you out of your fucking mind?
Be about $150,000. Today, homes now average at about $400,000.
Oh my god. Oh, I'm gonna throw up. $400,000.
This is almost 3 times as much. This is why baby boomers had almost no problems buying a house. In just a few years of having a job, they would easily be able to afford a home. It was extremely affordable to what they earned, living costs were reasonable, and homes were not really in demand, making it a perfect market. They also had the exposure of a simpler time. They would help their parents fix their homes and get a better understanding of maintenance. And then by owning up all these homes, their net worth has exploded in recent years at the same time. But of course,
I don't want to be a miserable, young person, but I feel like what's gonna happen when the baby boomers die? I don't want them to. I'm just wondering, what's gonna happen? I don't know the logistics of it. We're fricked? No, but what does actually happen to it? Do all the Gen Xers inherit that and then now they're the new baby boomers? Nothing changes. The world will change finally? I don't think so. I don't think the world is going to change. I think the next generation is going to inherit it and become the next baby boomers, I think, probably. If I had to wager, I guess. Again, I'm not a fucking historian or a statistician, but still.
For people today, it's the exact opposite situation. Now, the general rule of thumb has always been that you could eventually afford a house if the monthly payments were 30% of your monthly income. However, today, this isn't really that possible.
When I rented, 70 to 80% of my income went towards renting. And then the other 10% was for utilities. 30 fucking %. That's insane.
Most end up with 50%, leaving little money left to even survive. Owning a house also comes with insurance on the house and the responsibility of fixing anything that needs fixing, along with a bunch of taxes added on. And as the population exploded, so too did the demand for houses, making this a seller's market, eliminating most normal people's options of buying a home until they're at least 50 years old, leaving them paying rental costs for someone else or never having anything to show for it. Landlords know they can put up the price, and with so many potential occupants, they don't need to keep rental.
My old renting apartment, this rental is different, obviously, but my old rental, I spent 70 to 80% of my income on rent. And then they also increased it. I heard of horror stories of people having to scramble to find new places to live, and there's nowhere to go. It's so bad. I'm so lucky they only raised it by $100, and that was within my means of living, at least for the time being, but still, other people are not as lucky. Some people have it increased by $200 or $300.
Costs low. Even renting now comes with a list of add-on fees that most Gen Z just don't take into account, leading to people sharing homes in an attempt to afford them but still not making ends meet. And it's hardly a surprise. The average rent in places like New York alone is $4,000 a month, and that's without the bills and water costs, meaning that it's
and that's probably for apartments and shit, not houses. That's more than mortgages. Yeah, that's more than most mortgages.
a salary of $100,000 in some cases isn't even enough to be sustainable. Now, as unreasonable as that sounds, it's a harsh new reality for many people in high cost of living cities in the US. And for the most part, Generation Z are feeling the brunt of this, starting at the bottom of the ladder with the most debt and the least amount of possibility to get paid so much. And with inflation on top of this, it almost feels like to be in Gen Z and build any real wealth, it's just a never-ending battle not to go into debt. In the last 2 years alone, inflation has severely reduced purchasing power. We have 86% less power compared to baby boomers. To pay for
I had an old ass Taco Bell receipt that I used as a bookmark when I was reading a book from I think it was 2018. Oh my god. It was like a meal for one person was like $7. And that was like, I thought that was a lot at the time. And now that same meal is probably like $13. It's fucking insane. Obviously, it varies from state to state and like country to country, but that's still insane.
Basic needs like groceries, gas, and utility bills,
dude.
most have to choose often between saving more or discretionary spending. And while GDP figures and economic policies may show that the economy is improving, almost nobody's feeling
totally.
it. Things like quantitative easing GDP growth is mostly enjoyed by the older generations with wealth that's invested in the stock market or real estate. But if it's so much harder to get into the job market, and with wages massively stagnating, along with huge student debt, it's no surprise that debt levels are rising at an unprecedented rate compared to
I think the what was the statistic? The average person between like 21 to 20. No, it was 21 to 34 has an average debt of like $8,000. I forget what the stat was, but it was obscenely high. Yeah.
previous generations. Between
That's
2021 and
average, too.
2023,
Average.
Gen Z individuals aged 18 to 26 experienced a staggering 179% increase in their overall debt burden. This is the largest surge
Holy
among all
shit.
generation cohorts during that period. A substantial portion of this debt is attributed to student loans. As of 2022, 36% of older Generation Z people held student loan debt, with an average
Oh my
balance of
gosh,
$20,000. In comparison, older millennials and those of the same age in 2006 had a lower incidence of student debt and a lower average balance, indicating that Generation Z might be shouldering a heavier financial burden earlier in their life, which is really hardly any surprise with all these factors.
Because the college racket has increased since millennials finished school. I remember talking to my brother, and he was doing some sort of degree. I think it was like an English combined with something else. I forget what it was, but his was so much more. It was so much. I shouldn't say this, but I did a science degree, and I was supposed to go into engineering. And I'm thinking to myself, why the fuck does his one cost so much less, even now compared like 10 years ago? It's sad.
As mentioned, and it's why they're increasingly utilizing credit. By the end
And I understand that like the engineering degree obviously costs a lot more, but mine was substantially more than his, like an insane amount.
of 2023, 84% of
I got
credit-active
taxed,
Gen Z
yeah.
consumers possessed at least one general-purpose credit card, a huge increase from the 61% of millennials at the same age a decade prior. And this comes with higher interest rates on these debts, suggesting that many in Generation Z are very much struggling to manage their debt obligations effectively. So with all this
all that
considered, when
avocado
people say
toast.
generation are just more lazy than other previous generations, there's a lot more to this than it first seems. It's not laziness to have a coffee and an iPhone.
Why is this video on Gen Z? What the fuck? Millennials struggling to rent apartments? This dude's just joking, right? Okay, maybe you didn't come in here for the last 13 minutes. I'll break it down for you since you seem to be very upset. Millennials have been getting fucked, but Gen Z is getting fucked more in comparison. I'll say it again. Millennials are getting fucked, Gen Z get fucked more.
Or to not care about your job if you can't even afford to survive. This isn't to do with laziness and apathy, but more so the fact that there's no reason to care anymore. It's why employee confidence, morale, and birth rates are declining across the globe. And amongst everyone, Gen Z stands out with the lowest levels of worker engagement. Only 44%
It's because they're lazy. They want that Starbucks.
report job satisfaction compared to 67% of older workers. Driving these trends you hear about in the news like quiet quitting and bare minimum Mondays. But this is more just a symptom.
Bare minimum fun days. Hey, wait. I remember my brother texted me at his work, at his like corpo borpo job a long time ago, and him saying he was hiding from his job. This is probably more so that it's a social media trend that like got repopulated, but I definitely remember my brother who said, I'm hiding in the toilet for 30 minutes because I don't want to go back to work. Just long enough for them not to notice and get in
Of a
trouble.
much wider problem of broader societal discontent and stagnation. And as this happens, so too are the fertility rates dropping. The US recently reached a historic low of 1.62 births per woman, far below the 2.1
shit.
needed to sustain a stable population.
Are we turning into Japan, chat? We're actually gonna turn into Japan at this rate. Except in Japan it's from overworking, and that's a cultural thing. Whereas the US is more like, oh, I don't want to work because I don't see the point anymore.
And understanding these two interconnected trends reveals a much bigger generational and economic shift. The same sort of boring soulless corporate work no longer connects with Generation Z, especially when they can't even afford to live properly, causing 60% of US bosses to report terminating Generation Z employees for valuing flexible schedules and higher pay. And it's the same thing all around the West. Younger workers in the UK also feel so disengaged, with over 40% under 25 considering leaving their jobs due to burnout and a lack of career progression.
US is full of morons, sadly. Okay, hold on. Pause. This is affecting the whole fucking world, okay? I agree. The US is full of morons. I'm not gonna disagree with that. However, this has no influence on how stupid a population is compared to the economic suffering that everyone in the world is going through. In the UK, it's happening as well, by the way. The UK arguably has it even worse because they have massive brain drain. Brain drain being younger people that can get good jobs not wanting to stay in the UK. Nah, it's only in the US. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah.
Which aligns perfectly with the broader cultural shift away from traditional life milestones, including starting families and having children. And how can society expect Generation Z to be having large, happy families when the
Chat, tell your local VTuber to become a breeding cow and start popping out babies. They gotta start compensating or something.
The cost of raising a child is approximately $300,000 by age 17, and that's excluding college and inflation driving
What? Say that again?
dollars by age 17, and that's excluding
$300K by age 17. I remember my parents told me the statistic a while ago was like, what, $200,000? Now it's gone up even more.
college and inflation driving this figure higher. In the UK, childcare consumes over 20% of household income, making parenthood increasingly unattainable and only for the rich, however dystopian that may seem. High student debt, stagnant wages, and unaffordable housing all compounds to this challenge, not only discouraging job satisfaction but also having a family. It's why only back in 2003, 83% of people expressed a desire to become parents. But today, that number has now dropped down to 51%.
30% in 20 years is obscene. That's not good. That is not good at all.
All of this is compounding to something much greater than just Generation Z. This isn't just about Generation Z being lazy or whatever that means. The economic impact of all of this is going to be significant. Fewer young people entering the workforce exacerbates labor shortages, already visible in aging societies like Japan, where nearly 30% of the population is over 65. This imbalance increases financial pressures on workers, inflates taxes, and reduces benefits, further destabilizing economies.
And lowers fertility because people have to work even harder. Yeah. Chiming in from Gen X, I'm paying close to 50% of my monthly income in rent. Only 50%? That must be nice. I'm joking. Add in a car payment and $120 a week in gasoline. Jesus, what are you, a trucker? I commute 100 miles a day and it killed my old car. If rent goes up even a little more, I'm effectively homeless. Yeah, I felt that way when mine increased by like $100. I was like, fuck. Can I really afford this per month?
Businesses then face shrinking consumer bases and rising costs, slowing growth and threatening long-term stability. Efforts to reverse these declines, including family incentives and generous parental leave policies in nations like France, Japan, and Taiwan, have seen limited success. Cultural and systemic barriers persist, emphasizing that financial support alone can't resolve these issues, and Generation Z's emphasis on work-life balance, mental health, and flexibility has to be incorporated into policies and workplace strategies to foster greater engagement and address underlying challenges. Because if Generation Z are not making it on their own, how could they ever afford to support a family? It's hard enough without even having kids, which is a terrible tragedy.
I don't think Generation Z or anyone else would feel so miserable about their job if they got paid a decent amount of money. Case in point, OnlyFans. OnlyFans girls that make $100,000 get called slurs and names and insults, but does it really matter? Maybe they even get death threats to top it off. Does it really matter that they get called names when they're making $100,000 a month? Probably not. No. Again, I don't think people would be that unhappy. They would be happy to work in like customer service or whatever if it meant that you get paid a fair wage.
To support a home for a family, with our current home-to-income ratio being around 6 to 8 years, sometimes even 14 in other Western countries. But for baby boomers back in 1988, this ratio was only 4 years, and historically, US home prices...
Jesus Christ. Chad, I don't think this graph looked too good, huh? 5 times almost? Damn.
Is around 5 times the yearly income. Today, the ratio has exceeded even the 2008 housing bubble, which is even worse in the UK, where home-to-income ratios have been over 7 for a decade and recently just hit 9. The situation is spiraling out of control. So then how will this affect our future? Could this really be the start of a population collapse? Well, you see, here's what the US looked like in 2023. Instead of a large population of kids waiting to replace the adults as they get older, the opposite is now true. Even though child mortality has fallen drastically, 50 years of falling birth rates have done their damage, and there's now far more middle-aged and elderly people than children. So what's this chart going to look like in another 20 years? While we can pretty accurately predict the shape of that chart, the reality we're all going to be living in will be a lot more shocking. Aging populations and population decline present a massive problem for societies.
And also older people are living longer too. I think one of the biggest signs of this is in countries like America and maybe even a little bit of Canada. You have insanely old people that have been in Congress and in Parliament for like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And they just don't fucking die. And I'm not trying to say they should. I'm just saying that they're fucking old, man.
We don't need to imagine what these problems will be, as we can already see it today. Yeah. It's now predicted that over 20 developed nations will see their populations halve before 2100. The overall historical effects of this will be the same as with the plague. Sure, our grandchildren or even our great-grandchildren can enjoy the benefits, but for us, we're going to have to deal with the immediate fallout of demographic collapse. It means we'll likely see governments try to squeeze all the work they can out of their people to deal with the scarcity. Corporations and governments will push for Korean-style working conditions and hours if they think they can get away with it. 18-hour work days all day every week. And it's something everyone's going to have to fight back against if we want to prevent this. Now, every generation has undoubtedly gone through hardships far worse than what we see today. Men being conscripted to fight in the trenches for years, never-ending wars, never moving anywhere.
Because they had something to fight for, and that's what made it okay in like a lot of men's eyes. I don't want to get into like the whole man mentality of going overseas to protect their country, but I genuinely think there is probably a trickle-down problem with something like the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, where people don't want to fight as much for their country as they did like 50 years ago. They had something to fight for, a girlfriend or like babies, or they love their country and they want to like support it. Again, I'm sure there are people that do that anyway now, but I think there was a lot more back in the day.
Plagues, rations, Great Depressions, war would make anyone of the past scoff at any of our struggles today. But no issue recently has been so existential to the progression of humanity as this. It's why no matter what, you'll see those in the top of governments and corporations frantically worrying about the coming population collapse.
People are below the replacement rate in all 50 states of the US, even Mormon, Utah. The average woman has less than 2 kids.
Mormon, Utah. Uh-oh. For those that don't know, Mormons have a lot of sex. They have a lot of babies because it's in their like religion in Mormonism to have lots of babies.
Iran is below that, Italy way below it, South Korea.
Japan's in
but it's all these it's all these very different types of societies.
And yet to truly address this, we have to look at the root causes, most of which is coming from these exact issues, making Generation Z that much poorer today relative to any other time in modern history.
Oh, boomer moment. Chad, it'll get better. Right? Right, Chad? Right? It'll get better. No? Oh. Come on, it's not that bad, right? Jesus, dude. Never having a family. Bro, you just can't afford it. You can afford it if you're insanely rich. Insanely rich. I mean, like, top, like, I don't know, like 2%. The bottom 98% literally can't afford it. You're going into debt. Did you ever, I don't recall my parents ever saying that they went into debt, like, you know, having kids. Until, like, recently. Then there's the people who pretend they can afford it, but really there's just a massive credit card debt. Yes, and then they die, and then their credit card debt gets transferred to their kids. Yeah, it's horrible. I've actually met people like that in real life. Where they max out credit cards and shit to, like, sustain themselves. It's really, really sad. That happens, yep. Sure does.